As you may have guessed, I'm sitting on the front balcony of Holy Name Seminary. So this beautiful, vast building was built in 1963, the year that I was born, and it opened in 1965. And it's colonial American architecture. It's similar to Mundelein Seminary in Illinois. And I think architecturally, leaders at the time were trying to make a statement that you can be a good Catholic and a good American citizen at the same time. That was not always accepted. For much of our history, there's been this kind of insidious anti-Catholicism that if you're Catholic, then you can't really be a loyal American. You know, that if there was a Catholic president, he would simply pay obeisance to the Pope in all things. President Kennedy dealt with that. But clearly we can see that a good Catholic is also going to be a good citizen. That part of our faith is contributing to the common good. That part of practicing our Catholicism is being a member of our society who builds up other people, that we don't simply close in on ourselves. So Catholicism has never been this kind of inward entrenched church. We've always been open to society, wanting to be a leaven in society to transform the world for the sake of Christ and his kingdom. But we're Catholics first. We're Americans second. And if we're a member of a political party, that's a third. And I think sometimes that the tensions and conflicts in our country and even in our church today occur when people mix up that order. So we're Catholics first, we're Americans second, and we're members of a party if we are on third. If we keep that in line, then we realize that there are moral issues that have political implications, but we speak out on moral issues not because they're political, but because they're moral. That we have an obligation to vote and contribute to the common good and to the common weal of our society and to the political process. In many ways, we're in a crisis of leadership. We're in a crisis of so many things in our society and culture. This is a moment not for us to be retrenched, but to stand boldly as Catholic citizens in the United States and make our contribution to the common good, drawing on the rich tradition of Catholic social teaching, but also the beautiful spiritual perspective that we gain when we know that all of us are made in the image of God, purchased with the precious blood of Christ, and we, anointed with the Holy Spirit, are sent forth to be a leaven, salt, light in this world. You can be a good Catholic and a good American, and this building was architectural statement to that fact, but it becomes real when we live it in our own lives.
Hello, and welcome to No Soul Left Behind. I'm Laura Brockway. My last interview, I spoke with Ralph Epperson, author of The New World Order, and tonight is going to be a follow-up of sorts to that interview. I am going to be talking to James Conroy, author of Plucking the Eagle, Bringing Socialism to the United States. First of all, let's start out with a quick opening prayer, and I'm going to pray the Pater Noster in Latin. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Pater Noster, qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum. Adveniat regnum tuum. Fiat voluntas tua sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitte nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Welcome, James, and thank you so much for coming on to talk to us about your book.
Thanks for having me, Laura. Good to be here.
Okay, you wrote a book, Plucking the Eagle. I love the title. I want to first talk to you. How did you come about writing this book, and where did you get this great title?
Back in 89, 90, I was in DC and I met this gentleman. His name was William Gill, who wrote a book, Trade Wars Against America, History of Trade and Monetary Policy in the United States. And he wanted me to help him update his book. And it was a fascinating book. And we kept in touch after I moved back from DC to Connecticut. And I found out he passed away in 03, about 13 years after I met him. And so I took up the yellow legal pad and said, you know, I'll help, I'll write a book and add what he wanted to add, because he asked me to help him update. So I sat down and started an outline, and then from other books too, I felt that there was a lot of readable, handy information in other books and newspapers and magazines that you read that were pertinent to my book. And I kept writing and writing and writing. And after I was finished, I didn't think of the title first, but after I finished, I realized what I wrote, and I came up with the Plucking the Eagle, because what was a common thread, I sort of wrote 4 term papers, one on Federal Reserve, one on trade, one on taxes, and one on healthcare, and how the New World Order plan is embedded in these 4 subjects, and how they twist and turn how things are supposed to work, and they change and force some of their ideas on us, and they create a chaos with socialistic New World Order remedies. And it's a common theme throughout all those 4 subjects. And what I noticed after I wrote a lot of the book, I said, this is like plucking the eagle. You have an eagle, it soars, okay, wings, feathers, but you know, you take one feather, pluck one feather, it's still an eagle. But if you do this over, you know, 100 years, every month, eventually you don't have any more feathers. And the symbol of the United States, the eagle, is featherless, and hence plucking the eagle, because it's small incremental steps that these people are doing. They go unnoticed, but when you add them all up together, you're like, wow, okay, this is what's been going on. So that's how I came up with the book and the title.
It's great. I love it. And they, you know, they do that in everything that they do. They move the window a little at a time until we're trapped. So as first of all, let's start out about your first chapter, the Federal Reserve. What is the purpose of the Federal Reserve, and how does that relate to the New World Order?
Well, the Federal Reserve is a central bank. And when I was studying for my Series 7 on Wall Street in 1987, I just graduated from college, and I'm trading bonds right there on Wall Street. And I'm studying for my Series 7, and I realized in the literature, in the book, it says the central bank, the Federal Reserve, is not part of the US government. It's a private entity. So a red flag goes up. I'm like, this is interesting. And when I went down to DC, that was 87, I went down to DC in 89, and that's when I met this author, William Gill, that I spoke about. And he had me read his book, and he was telling me more about it, like I'm telling you guys. And the Federal Reserve, again, was created in 1913 because of some previous chaoses that happened. And they came up with this remedy where they can control the money. And as Rothschild once said, if you want to control the people, control the money. Now, I think everyone knows that up until, call it 1900, we didn't have a central bank. Okay, you can recall Andrew Jackson didn't, what do I want to say, legislate for the second US bank. And they created some chaos and panic. There was, you can just go with the copper by J.P. Morgan in 1907. He cornered the market and created a crash. And they used that on purpose crash that people sort of performed. They orchestrated it. They came up with the central bank, the Federal Reserve, in 1913, 16th Amendment. And the central bank's function is to provide some elasticity to the money supply, which is they can take money out or put money in to prevent. The number one reason was to prevent the boom and bust cycles, which the 1907 preempted. But as you know from 1900, we've had a lot of boom and bust cycles, 29, early 70s. I'm probably missing one in the 40s or 50s. The war in the 50s wasn't that bad, but we had, I think, a little one in the 60s. We had one in the early 70s. We had the 87 crash. So the Federal Reserve was supposed to prevent all of that. And they will orchestrate a problem and will enact socialistic policies. And that's how they gain control of your life. And you can see it today and I'll get to it with trade and taxes and healthcare, but you can see it today with the current events. So
sure, that's pretty much across the board with socialism. The government, or in this case, the Federal Reserve, which is a private entity, they create the problem and then they offer the only solution, which happens to be a socialistic solution, but the people are so desperate because there's no other solution that they accept it. Kind of how they do things.
Yes. In fact, some of my friends that read the book said, bringing socialism, it sounds like you want this to happen. I probably used the wrong word in my first book. It's almost forcing or surreptitiously introducing socialism to the United States. But I was 3 months late writing the book. But they want to control the money supply because that was the first step to control the population of a country. And they did this. I'm sure Ralph probably mentioned Rothschilds before, but to get control of the money and to develop a central bank, as I said, they needed control of the money, and they used, I hate to say it, but they used the Jewish people, Warburg, Rothschilds, Barings, and it sounds mean. They're nice people, I'm saying, but it was a 1600 Christian edict that said Catholics and Christians could not transact business on Sundays, but the Jewish people could. So that made them bankers. So they became merchant bankers. And when kings needed money for wars, they went to these merchant bankers, or they needed money for anything. They went to the merchant bankers. Merchant bankers would loan them money with the caveat that the merchant bankers would be the sole lender to the government, which introduced the Dutch East Indies companies. The merchant bankers the country wanted to expand, you had to use a certain merchant banker to expand to these foreign countries, hence the Dutch East Indies. And to introduce it into the United States, they bring in, according to Bill Gill, they bring in other books, they bring in Cecil Rhodes. And how does Rhodes get involved? Well, it's sort of called the Mandrake mechanism. He went down to South Africa, which the Dutch used to own, and for diamonds, and he became very wealthy. Well, the Dutch moved a little bit north to the Vaal region, which is the Boer is farmer in Dutch, and they found that there was gold there. So Rhodes actually used the army of the British Empire to take over where the Dutch got pushed out of South America. And if you notice, there's a country down there in South Africa called Rhodesia. It was named after Cecil Rhodes. And so Rhodes comes back to England, and they develop with some other powerful bankers the Royal Academy of International Studies, RICE, RAIS. That became part or introduced into the United States with the Rhodes Scholars, and they developed the Council of Foreign Relations. And that's how that came to the United States. So once they got infiltrated in to the United States and they put their people in place, they could perpetuate their means.
Okay. You kind of went through the you were talking about the merchant bankers. I felt like that. I feel like that's a very good segue to go into the next chapter, which is trade. Now, what role has trade played in this particular, the NWO?
Oh, well, to explain trade in the next chapter, taxes, those two are intertwined because um, as when you have develop a trade deficit, you have a revenue shortage, and then to sort of even out the seesaw, you need to increase taxes, and it's all about disposable income, and the government doesn't want too many people have too much of disposable income. And how does the New World fit into this? Well, to go back to the Federal Reserve, just to explain, once they got the Council of Federal Reserve and the central bank in 1916, they orchestrated the first crash in 29. Okay. The Britain had a very good economy. They wanted the U.S. economy to be in a par. So it was mainly they flooded a lot of money, just like now with what Biden's doing with stimulus. They blew a balloon. Then they raised the discount rate, which took money out, and you create the crash. And what you have after that is FDR and his socialistic, WPA, all his the Great Society, which didn't work for 8 years, and until the war. In fact, the CFR, when the office was right next to FDR's house in New York City. That's how closely they worked. Now, how does that involve trade? Well, that's what generated the revenue before the income taxes. So the United States, say from 1776 to 1913, they relied on revenue from trade, import duties. And how well were the import duties doing? Well, Louisiana purchase in 1903 or 1803 with Thomas Jefferson was $15 million. He had $5 million in the bank already from revenue. After the Civil War, during the Civil War, they tried to tax, it's called the war tax, and it didn't work. Things were taxed, items were taxed 12 times, made it too expensive, people didn't buy it. So therefore, there's no revenue coming in. Lincoln imposed the war tariff, which raised things about 47% on items that foreigners would pay to get their goods into the United States. It was that tariff from 1862-3 all the way to 1900, which spurred all the growth, the Industrial Revolution, paid for the Panama Canal, paid for the Great White Fleet, paid for the Spanish-American War, and took care of all the land we got from the Spanish-American War, namely the Philippines, Puerto Rico. We were able to afford that before there was an income tax. That was all provided by the trade tariff revenue, and there was no income tax. So then they create the problem. They raised the tariffs in 1907. I think it was the Payne-Aldrich tariff. And they raised the tariff. Revenues aren't coming into the Treasury, so therefore they need to bring in the taxes. So they introduced the central bank in 1913. There's a deficit and debt coming to the Treasury, and they make it up by penalizing the people in the form of taxes. And how that affects the New World Order is because of the central bank, they eventually get, well, Woodrow Wilson tried it with the League of Nations, but they get the United Nations. And you get, after you get the United Nations, you get into the World Trade Organization, you get into the World Health Organization, and you get all these government bureaucracies, not government, they're non-elected officials that overrule our laws. And there were two examples about, well, one was the ships, the cruise lines, about dumping waste. And so here we have our population, our citizens, our voters saying we need clean beaches and clean water. So for the US cruise lines, they have to pump their waste a certain mileage overseas or come to shore. Well, that is, quote, unfair to the competition. So foreign ships could dump in these waters that would affect our beaches. So they're overruling some of our laws. and they did it with, I think it was dolphins and the Japanese. It was an unfair trade practice. And, they brought in GATT in the 50s, the General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs, and then they brought in NAFTA. And so they are able to manipulate and pick winners and losers. And so they're able to just sort of steer us in the way that they want to go, because we lose control of what we're eventually going to do because they override our laws. I'm sure I'm missing something else.
And all of them are unelected. We don't have any say. And for the most part, we don't really know who they are, correct? I mean,
Well, no, I mean, some of them meet in Davos nowadays. They're nameless. They're really nameless. You really have to dig for them.
Nameless, faceless, and they control us.
Yes, exactly. They do control us. I was just thinking about the other aspect of trade. Yeah, the rulings, the lowering of tariffs. Yeah, just the loss of money to the revenue. I was thinking, before 1900, with the tariffs put in place, what happens with tariffs? People don't understand tariffs. They think it's a tax, and it's not a tax on the consumers. That's what the media wants you to believe. The tariff is more like a cover charge to get into a bar, to make it reasonable to listeners out there. You have a bunch of goods coming in from England or whatever country, they pay a fee to the United States to introduce their goods to our country. That's what the Tea Party was all about. There was a tax on British goods to get into the country. They passed the Townshend Act to eliminate those duties, and with the exception of tea. So the colonists had to pay taxes on the tea, and they didn't want to do that. And so they threw them overboard. And it's actually the same thing that started, to me, the Civil War. Everyone says it's about slavery. Yes, that was a secondary, tertiary. But why was Fort Sumter bombed? Fort Sumter was bombed because the Northern troops came down to collect revenue. There were ships called the revenue cutters. They were to collect revenues, and the Southerners didn't want to collect that fee. The Southerners brought cotton to England to manufacture, to bring it back, and the colonies would have to pay a tax on that good. It would make their prices more expensive, and they didn't want to do that. So they didn't want to collect the revenue. So the North came down and said to Fort Sumter, which is right, at the entrance to the harbor, you have to collect these fees, and they didn't, and that created the war. People say it was about slavery, but it wasn't, because if it were about slavery, let me just make this point. It was about slavery because this was in Ron Chernow's book, Grant, a great book. If it were about slavery, the Northern troops, the Union troops, went through Virginia and North Carolina to South Carolina to Fort Sumter. If it was about slavery, the Union troops or the Confederate troops in Virginia and North Carolina would have attacked the Northern troops going down to Fort Sumter. They started to settle more about states' rights, and they let it be. So it wasn't so much about slavery, because there were slaves in Virginia and slaves in North Carolina. So anyways, back to the trade issue. Yeah, you can see it. It hurts unemployment, because these are the figures I was looking about before. Around the Civil War, when that trade was imposed, the tariffs, we went from 140,000 manufacturing plants. By 1900, we had over 500,000. That's employing a lot of people, paying, generating commerce. And we had almost a $2 billion economy that went to $13 billion. So it was good for everyone. As I said, we paid for the Great White Fleet, the Panama Canal, all this without taxes. And right now, that's what Donald Trump was doing. We had some problems with NAFTA, and we lost jobs because of NAFTA, but a lot of countries in NAFTA and also the Pacific Rim had most favored nation status. And everyone in the Pacific Rim did away with it. That's good for the first few years to get going. But after you get going, you become like equal trade partners. There's no most favored nation. The only country that did not relinquish their most favored nation trade status was China. So Trump was hitting them hard and hitting South America hard for the trade status. He pulled out of the Health Organization. He pulled out of the WTO, the Trade Organization. And I recall in December reading in the newspapers and seeing in the news, Biden's elected but not even inaugurated. What do the papers and the media say? Don't worry, Biden vows to get back into the World Trade Organization and get back into the World Health Organization. They didn't care who was in just as long as Trump was out. And because Trump knew what was going on. And he was right all along. I'm sure there's some other stuff I could say about trade. But do you have any questions?
I don't on that. That was pretty deep. But it did explain to me exactly kind of how we handed that piece right on over to them. I mean, or maybe we didn't hand it to them. How they took it from us. So
in this too, because this is what I was also spinning around in my mind that I want to add. Trade used to be settled by, I think it was Article 2, Section 8, or Article 3 in the Constitution, which means Senate deliberations and approval. And somehow, either through advice and consent of the UN, but somehow that got changed that the president can now negotiate trade practices. It used to be the senators. And remember, during the time of the Constitution, the senators didn't come down to DC. They were farmers, manufacturers, industrial men. They came down for a short period of time to vote on big things. So this was one of the big things, trade. And that was in the Constitution. But since then, and even though the senators are down in DC now, and they have been for 100 years, it's now the president can negotiate trade without the advice and consent of the Senate, and it's called fast track legislation. And that's how the New World Order, depending upon, it doesn't matter what you want in Ohio, what I want in Connecticut, what businesses want, what's good. The New World Order has one of their persons in the White House. They can just disregard Congress and say, we want to do this with that country. Done. Fast track legislation. That's it. And so it's, it's sort of too bad because what's happened when NAFTA got passed, we had a surplus with Mexico, and after it's gotten passed, we've had a deficit. And the problem is, ever since we've had a deficit after World War II, the deficit came in the early 70s, trade deficit. The value of the dollar goes down. And what happens when the value of the dollar goes down? Inflation and disposable income because of taxes. You have less disposable, and that's what they want. They want more government control of your life.
They steal more of our money, right?
They steal more. They steal it in two ways: by increasing taxes and bringing in more taxes, but also creating inflationary pressure on the dollar because the dollar is worth less with more of a debt. Think of your own personal credit card.
And then, just overall, their goal is to make sure that we have the least amount of money possible. They do not want us to have money.
Correct. Well, they want to give you they want to give you enough to sort of subsist, but they also want you to be dependent upon the government. And I can tell you an example of that in taxes, but I want to finish this point. This is a quote, as I said, one of the guys, the Warburgs and the Rothschilds. Again, Ron Chernow wrote a book on the Warburgs, but this is one of the sons or grandsons. It was 1950, James Warburg. In the Senate, he said, we'll have world government by conquest or consent. This is in 1950 after World War II, because what happened after World War II? They got the UN passed. And with that, they got the they got the GATT, which became the WTO. So again, you have more non-elected bureaucrats hanging out in Europe, deciding what's best for our country. Yeah, and to just segue into the next chapter, which is taxes, because they overlap, because of the trade deficit down, the government needs revenue, and they impose taxes. And the first tax was, I think it was 1% on $3,000 of income. Do the math on that. I think it was 1% on $4,000 if you were married. And it was 6% on $20,000 up to or $500,000. But that was it. And now look at what the income tax rates are. There's five or, depending upon the president and the Congress, there's 5 or 6 rates. They're progressive. And now think of how many other taxes are there. And besides the sales tax, inheritance tax, there's the dog registration tax, the
property tax, car tax,
this tax,
road tax, SNAP tax, VAT tax, everything.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of taxes. And so the current example, to appeal to the people out there, Biden wanted to give a $2,000, Trump gave $600 or $400. He wanted to print money and give you $2,000, $1,600 or $1,400. Stimulus, everyone, $2 trillion or $1 trillion. That just raises inflation, but it also it makes the citizens beholden to the government. Turn it the other way around. When you think like you and I do, Laura, things will make sense to the people that see these everyday events. Wouldn't it have been easier to lower taxes 1 or 2% across the board? Of course. For the non-working people that aren't working, fine. A little stimulus, fine. Increase their unemployment. What the government did is, instead of giving us tax cuts, which is against their modus operandi, they say to the government says, look, we'll give you money and we're going to add a lot of goodies to it. This is the swamp. You're going to get $1,400, but we're going to charge everyone $14,000 to give you. We're going to spend the $14,000, but you're only going to get $1,400 of it. The other $11,000, $12,000, $13,000 are for goodies we want. Programs that beholden the population to the mothership, the government. And it would have been easier just to cut rates, right?
Absolutely, definitely. It would have helped us a lot more. It would have helped everyone a lot more. Of course, I needed the $1,400, but that's the whole point. They purposely put us in a situation where I needed the $1,400 that desperately, where I was happy with it. That's the little bone they're throwing. That's the game that they play.
Yeah. And during McKinley's era, before he was shot, and James Garfield was shot, Lincoln was shot, but for a different reason. They were all protectionists, which means they wanted, George Washington was a protectionist. He wanted, we should make all our supplies, especially military, in our country. We shouldn't be dependent on foreigners. They tried to have an income tax back in the late 1899, 1900, before McKinley was shot, and the Supreme Court of the United States ruled it unconstitutional. So they changed the wording, sort of like Obamacare. They changed the wording to an excise tax, but it went away. It only lasted for a few years until McKinley was shot, and then Teddy Roosevelt came in, and then you had that copper crisis with Morgan, where he was trying to corner the market and created a crash in 1907. And shortly after that, they're making plans for the 1913 16th Amendment with the central bank. That's the chaos with socialistic remedies. It makes me wonder what's going to happen with this pandemic and how we're going to come out of it.
I have a question about that, if I can just, sorry to interrupt you, but so we're back about this we're calling it 1400. I think it was 1200 and then 1400, but it doesn't matter how much it was. We're saying 1400. Was this
It was
the
14.
same kind? Yeah, was it okay? Was this the same MO? Now, did our leaders go to the merchant bankers and become beholden to them for that money?
Well, no, the merchant bankers got changed to, that just became the mechanism.
Right, right.
Central
But
bank.
that was the same thing they pulled with us, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the
So it's happened
Rothschild
to us
job
too.
or the
Yeah.
Mandrake mechanism. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they have the central bank is printing money. You know, we used to have the gold standard, you know, the hard currency. I remember when dollar bills, I still have one. It said silver certificate.
I still have one too.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I have one. You know, you used to be able to, now it's the promissory note based on what? Based on the taxes and the assets of the United States government. It's a fiat dollar. You know,
Right.
it's central bank saying here. And they give you money and you pay interest back. You know the law of supply and demand?
Mm.
Here's an interesting thought. Law of supply. When you have more of something, the prices go down, right? Why, when the economy's good, you think the money supply should be cheap? So why does the central bank raise rates? Because they can extract more money from the taxpayer or the people trying to loan money. They're
Mm.
charging more because they can get more.
Sure.
It's sort of a weird way to think about things, but that's sort of what they're
No,
doing.
though, because it still plays with the exact same thing. They want us to have as little money as possible, and they want to have control of it all. So it
They,
really
they
is the same
right.
thing.
Well, you know, again, this is current day.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, you know, related to trade and taxes. Look at the Keystone Pipeline. I don't know how much of that would help. It was going to be shipped overseas, I heard, but it's a visual. And people associate Trump in passing the Keystone Pipeline with inexpensive gas. It was $1.60 or 70. That doesn't, excuse me, Biden gets in and reverses that. Then he okays the Russian pipeline, and now he's begging OPEC for oil, and oil gas is over $3, $3.50, whatever, depending on where you are. Why? Doesn't make sense. They want to control your life, and they want you to be pushed towards battery-operated cars. They want to drive up the price of gas to say, well, the alternative is battery-operated. They want to make it cheaper for you. Just it's sort of like instead of the gas guzzlers of the 70, buy the imported Toyotas because they get 20 or 30 miles to the gallon to the GMs that got 7 or 8 back in the day, where they want things to make it so expensive that you want to get off fossil fuel cars and go to their pushing you to battery, they're pushing you to solar, wind, they're pushing solar and wind energy. And, you know, that's what Obama did. You know, he had the government invest in 10 companies, Cylinder being one of them. They all went down the tubes. And it's a little bit about why they're paying people to stay at home. Restaurants in Connecticut, I'm sure out in Ohio, have a tough time finding people. They're getting paid more money to stay at home. They're trying to force business because they can't legislate it in Congress. Even though they did sort of legislate a minimum wage, they're forcing, by giving the people at home more money, they're forcing the manufacturers and the restaurants to say, you better pay them more. And in a sense, it's a good thing, so long as it's privately owned, because there's an element of me that likes what Henry Ford always said, you know, you got to pay your workers because they're going to turn around and buy the car you're making. But there's an element for that. Domestic competition's good, but when McKinley said we can't afford to have cheap labor, it's very tough for U.S. to compete with foreign labor. So what Trump was doing to bring it home and manufacture things at home is good. You get more employment, and
It's always been what's best for our country when we were self-sufficient, and that everybody's life was better, is better at the times where we've been more self-sufficient. So
think about everyone that you know and everyone out there, buying the book or not, even if you're just listening to this. Think of all the money you're paying in Social Security, income tax, sales tax, property tax, car tax, this, blah, 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 blah. You'd have enough money to take care of your health care. You'd have enough money to take care of your retirement. You wouldn't be relying on the government so much for Social Security. Years ago, remember, they tried to get Social Security, allow people to invest their Social Security instead of getting 1 or 2%. Someone can say, I can do better than 1 or 2%. Let me invest the money that I've been given as Social Security. It's a second tax. Everyone knows it. And it's a little bit of a Ponzi scheme.
Oh, it is the biggest Ponzi scheme
Right?
there is. I was
That's,
just talking to a friend of mine
that's
who
what's
is
going
an
on.
investment broker right now. And he was just saying Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme that's ever existed.
Yeah.
And, you know, Ponzi schemes are illegal for everyone, for the poor people, but
Yeah.
that's certainly not for the rich or for the
Well,
government. So,
And look how greedy the government is. When the Social Security was around until whatever, the 70s or 80s, that was essentially free to the recipient. But the greedy people in Washington said, no, let's tax that. So how many times are you paying taxes on Social Security? How many times are you paying taxes on dividends? The dividends are triple taxed. You want to help out a lot of people in this country? Make capital gains tax free. Okay. A lot of people would make a lot of. One of the last times I was in Wall Street, Apple. Was it Apple or Bill Gates? I think it might have been Bill Gates. A Christmas present. He gave everyone $3 a share. Microsoft. He had a lot of money, and he gave a lot of money out to people in dividends. Now think of that. Now, I looked at this, and there's an electric company. Yep, there's an electric company out there that is. They had $14 cash on hand per share, and they gave out 88 cents that year. Now think of all the people in mutual funds that own, Fortune 500 companies. If the dividends were incentivized to be distributed and tax free, there'd be a lot more people out there with a lot more money.
and that's what they don't want.
And
So,
that's what they don't want.
right. All right. Okay. You mentioned healthcare. Let's move on to the fourth chapter, which is healthcare, which is a big one. So how does healthcare play into the big picture of the NWO?
Well, doctors used to be like, say, any other profession. You went to the doctor, you paid the doctor. And then things got expensive after the war. This one's on memory. And the government, Medicare, or the insurance companies would pay the patient, and then the patient would pay the doctor. A lot of times, the doctor wouldn't get full pay because the patient would do 80%, the insurance would pay 80%, and the patient would pay the next 20. So the doctor said, look, we're not getting paid our full bill. So the government started to send money right to the doctors. Okay, intro right there. But the caveats, the government said, if you're going to get the check directly from the government, you have to consider that full pay. The consumer's off the hook. Ask any other profession, lawyer, accountant, 80-20, whatever it was, that no, the lawyer, no, the consumer's free, and you're only going to get a certain amount.
Right.
Now, the insurance companies used to take care of healthcare. It was a small percentage back then, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. But then HMOs became expensive. It went from like if you were a business and you had a bunch of insurance, 10 different insurances for everything. The bottom one was healthcare, but the healthcare expenses for the insurance companies and the businesses got so high, and they created HMOs. And the HMOs is basically a middleman run by the government. And, nowadays, it was just in the Hartford Current. It happened to my dad 20 years ago. The insurance companies are trying to practice medicine because they're telling a doctor when that person, that surgeon can operate on. The guy was a ophthalmologist and he wanted to do a cataract and he had to get permission first. Well, my dad once had an emergency appendectomy. He went up at 3 a.m. in the morning. He had to wait until 7 or 8 o'clock for the insurance companies to open it to get permission. And now he's saying at 3:30, if he's in the OR, if this guy has a ruptured appendix and I can't operate, I'm going to get sued. So now I have to wait for the insurance company to give me permission. Knock on wood, fingers crossed, the guy doesn't rupture. He would have operated if it, something happened. But this was conferred on me. I read this once, and a guy, an insurance executive from the Midwest, who was in Hartford, the insurance capital of the world, he says, "You're absolutely right. It started in the Midwest, how how medicine, healthcare got involved by corporations and the government. It was farmers and mechanics. And to entice people to be teachers, farmers, they were out in the farmland, to get teachers there, they couldn't afford them. So they paid teachers healthcare. It was a small, but everyone out there could afford it. That word spread from the farmland in the Midwest to the automobile industry. And the automobile industries were the first corporations that had healthcare provided by the employer. Then that spread elsewhere. And then, as I said, it became too expensive, and we started with the HMOs, which is creating a middleman. And in my book, 50% of premium dollars for healthcare go to salaries of non-medical people. Think of that. They're everyone from secretaries to administrators to whatever. They don't put on a Band-Aid. They don't operate.
All the bureaucrats that we were talking about.
All the bureaucrats. And, my dad was a doctor. My grandfather was a doctor back in the 20s. So I have 100 years of experience in this. To have the government tell you and tell the doctor what they can and can't do. They're not, practicing medicine anymore. They have to see a certain amount of patients. They can't charge what they want to do. The malpractice is out of this world, and they're more in control. Hell, they're even trying to tell you what to eat, what you can't eat, what car to drive, all this stuff. And so that's how they get involved. And the New World Order isn't so much like what I said in trade and taxes, because that's monetary. This is just with the healthcare. And even though there's a money aspect to it, people expect it to be free. It's like it's a right, like a constitutional right, but it doesn't say that. And go to a lawyer and accountant and say, do my taxes or take care of this, and I want the government to pay for it. And it doesn't work that way.
Right. And, you mentioned there is a part in your book in the medical I really related to, when you talked about how people are going to the doctor for ridiculous things, and that's very true, because we are spoiled. And I'm not talking about me necessarily, because I don't run to the doctor. In fact, almost never. But I know a lot of people who do. You get a little nick on your finger. Oh, I'm bleeding. I have to run to the ER. And people are spoiled and think that every little thing needs a doctor, and it really does drive the price up. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. No, the prices sort of don't go up. Not to just quote my dad, but it happened to a lot of people. He got out of Vietnam, and there was a certain price for an operation, call it $400, that 25 years later, with the consumer price index, the CPI, should have been $3,000, $4,000. But his fee, dictated by the insurance company, not him, by the insurance company, was only about $800. He'd get 80% of that. And now he's down to 640. And then he had to pay malpractice. And then he had to take care of his staff. And the math he did is for 12 months minus 2 to 3 weeks of vacation, he kept the money he made was 2 months worth of work.
I believe it.
The
I
other,
was just,
the other 10 months were working for someone else, the government, insurance companies. And, you know, it's getting like that with people nowadays with taxes. I'm becoming an employee of the government, a servant, you know, how, you know. So that's how they're taking over. That's, you know, the World Health Organization coming up with, who are these people? Who elected them? Do we trust them? I don't know.
mm,
If someone's
and
making decisions that affect us, and you know, who are they?
mm,
You
very,
know,
very true. I
it,
know that I'm gonna just verify what I was thinking today. I was looking at a doctor bill, and I can't believe my doctor could even live on what my insurance lets him have. So, you know, I mean, it was such a tiny little percentage. I'm not going to give the dollar amounts, but I, there was 90% of the bill was, you know, insurance write-off. They pay a little bit, I pay a little bit. And out of this entire doctor visit, the doctor's getting like $100 out of just, you know, and believe it was a medical procedure
no,
that I got.
I'm glad you
So
said.
it was,
No, I'm glad you said 10% because that stands in line with the story I'm going to tell you right now. When my dad, you know, my dad retired in '99, but near the end, he the money he kept was about 14% of the overall bill. And the government and the HMOs have created a bureaucracy. Ding, ding, ding. The chaos to a solution. Government bureaucracy, just like the Department of Education. It's bloated with government employees, and we really don't need it. And here's an example, it's in the book, 300-bed hospital with one administrator. Same, thank you. The same hospital's down to about 90 beds and 15 administrators. And they're all making how much money?
Mm.
But you basically, and this, I confer this with a doctor friend of mine who's currently working, he's in Atlanta. It's a two-tier system. You have employers and employees paying a lot of healthcare money, and they get care, but they're overcharged in their premiums to take care of the people who aren't. And I
right.
would say, and some of the illegal immigrants, they're a big cost to. But the indigenous people, that's fine. You know, that's what happens.
Sure. So basically, let's just say I'm going to round this off. Let's say I pay $100 a month in a premium. Most of my premium's not going to healthcare. It's going to pay all of these administrative costs and all of these other things that you're talking about, but not for my actual care, right?
Well, yeah, I'd say about in the book when the research I did was about 50%.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, now, you know, are you getting the full 50 or 50? Well, you're getting taken care of, but yeah, the $50 could be taken care of someone else, but the 50 is going to non-medical personnel. Yeah, absolutely.
When you think about someone like me who is rarely ever sick and I'm paying all these premiums and I almost never use them, it's just going into the system, and
well, yeah, well,
none of that's going for healthcare because I'm not even making any claims.
I offer a solution, sort of in what to do in all these chapters, what can be done. And one of the things in healthcare, it was the last chapter and I wanted to get the book written. I was sort of halfway finished. I sort of said, you know, it should be less expensive and the person should be paying the premium, which they do. But I didn't get a chance to finish my thought when I wrote the book, but I'm a proponent of, I'm a proponent of having an individual have, and they came out with it, a health savings account, but have the premium dollars go to the hospital. You pick your doctor, you pick your hospital, sort of like a college or university. Now, if you're on if you're in a job and it's work related and you get into a car accident, does the employer pay for your car, or does your personal insurance pay for it? Your personal insurance pays for it. But if I'm skiing, non-work related, and I bust out my knee, why does my employer take care of that? Right? Because it gives the government a chance to create a bureaucracy, which is what they want. If I had my doctor at a hospital, and because I pay $800 a year for car insurance, and I have coverage to $50,000 to $100,000. Why can't I pay $800 to the hospital, pick my doctor? He can find out what I need. I may need more insurance based on my genes, what's in my DNA, and the money stays in the hospital.
You know,
They don't like that concept because they're not in control of the.
exactly. They're not in control. And that's exactly what I was going to.
What is the definition of socialism?
This part is not in your book, but I know now we've come a step further from the HMOs. And I have a little bit of knowledge about that because I accidentally learned about this in San Francisco. And I say accidentally because I was accidentally recruited by a communist organization. They had a booth at Jamba Juice, and they called it volunteering. They made it sound really good. I went to one meeting. I wanted to volunteer to find out what it was about. And 10 minutes in, this other guy and I looked at each other. We said, "This is communist," and we got out of there. But what it was about, this was in about 2006, 2007, okay. And they had a penthouse on Sutter Street in San Francisco with call lists to the ceiling. It was the community organizing that we hear about since then. And what they were about was they played it like this. Well, you know, doctors aren't making very much money because of the insurance companies. And it wasn't about money, though. It was about doctors don't get to decide on your health care. They don't get to decide what you need. The insurance company is deciding what you need. And so they said, we are trying to take away the power from the insurance companies and give it to the doctors. And that sounds really good. It really does sound good on the surface. I thought, oh, that's a really good thing. Sure. But that now that I see over the years how it's played out with Obamacare and socialized medicine, I realized they wanted the doctors to have control because they control the doctors. And that is why the bureaucrats are calling the shots on our healthcare. They won't let the doctors do this, or they won't let the doctors do that. Or if, as we've seen in today's medical system, they'll fire the doctor or take away his license if he's trying to do something outside the approved system. You know, socialized medicine is a single payer healthcare system, also means a single ethic. And it's not our Christian ethic, our Catholic ethic at all. So, but everybody has to go by the same ethics. So, for instance, what they're trying to do with Down syndrome, or you know, that's just one example. They want to prevent Down syndrome children from being born, and the disabled. I mean, you know, it's about depopulation, but also it's about, they don't want these people in the healthcare system because they don't want to pay for it. So, sorry, I kind of went off topic of your book, but I kind of see how that has gone, especially the way you say how they set up the HMOs like that, because well, where we're at today is a perfect.
Well, the doctors aren't allowed to practice medicine, and the bedside manner's gone out the window. My dad sort of hinted to me recently that, if there was a Vietnam vet, you know, if it didn't really involve the hospital where there'd be some sort of charge, you know, he would waive the fee. Some minor surgery that he could.
Can't even do that anymore, can they?
Right, and if he wanted to spend an extra 10 or 15 minutes, he could. But now, because I know recently, my dad's former partners, they used to be independent, but now they are with the hospital, and they're required to see a certain amount the patients. So people, my dad's out retired. He's just, I sort of love it because the people that drove me nuts wanted socialized medicine are going to get what they want, and it's not going to be good for them. And they're complaining about there's no bedside manner. He saw me for 2 minutes. He raced out of the examination room. Sorry, they got to go see someone else. They don't have time. You're fine.
Right.
There's none of that. And
They have absolutely no say in the treatment that they're giving their own patients.
Yeah.
And,
They have to
yeah,
go
that's
check
kind of
with
how it
someone.
happened. They took it maybe away from the insurance company to give it to the doctors, but then they took it away from the doctors right away. And
Exactly.
the system
But
now has
there
complete
were
control over your health and my health because it was on purpose how they manipulated us. They moved the window a little at a time. And now they can take a patient in the hospital and euthanize them. That's where we're at.
As I said,
They own us.
small incremental steps. It looks good until you really see where
That's
you
right.
are at the final. That's what
That's
I
right.
warn people about in the book, and you can see it all the time.
Absolutely. Really. Wow. It's making it very clear now after hearing you explain the HMOs to just exactly why we are where we are and how we got here. Absolutely.
Well, they created the middleman. Yeah. And if as I said, we covered a lot of topics, but, hopefully if anyone buys the book or reads it, or if they have any questions, you can reach out to me. My email, James Conroy 2000 at Yahoo. There's my book. You can Amazon it. Should be a link up there. It came out in 2009.
We will put a link with this post where you can buy James' book.
If people, this book will help make sense out of things that are going on today. And it's sort of not preaching, but educating. Say, look, you want to know what's going on with a Keystone. You want to know what's going on with the taxes. You want to know what's going on this. This is their agenda. And when you understand their agenda, it makes sense why they're doing it. But we don't want that to happen. So you have to be aware of the problem, and people are, but this helps explain why and where they're headed.
And it truly does. In all four of these categories, James's book truly explains exactly where we started, where we are now, and the steps on how we got here and how they trapped us. So I really recommend, I highly recommend Plucking the Eagle. Sorry, sure, yeah.
Yeah, the people out there, if you want to ask a question, let me ask you this question. Up until 1913, we didn't have a debt, we didn't have an income tax, we didn't have a Federal Reserve, we didn't have a deficit. There's a difference between deficit and the national debt. One's a fiscal yearly thing, the other one's accumulated. So we didn't have any of those things. We had one of the highest standard of livings at that time. We had a beautiful Navy, we had colleges, we had roads, blah, blah, blah. So in 100 years from 1913 until today, we're 30 trillion in debt. We have numerous taxes, high income taxes, and what's going on with our infrastructure? Why? What happened? This explains what happened and how we got to where we are.
100%. It really does. And even someone like me, truly, I read the book, I love the book, and I just sat there and as I'm reading it, I can't tell you how many times. I remember when that happened. I see that happening now. Oh, this happened either to me personally, or you really do relate to the things that you're reading because we experience them, and you will learn that things that have happened to you were set up. It was all a trap, and it just, everyone is so confused and thinking, how do we get here? What are we doing? This will tell you exactly how we got here. I promise you. There it is.
Thanks,
anyway, I really got a lot out of it, and I'm going to read it again. I wanted to read it quickly for this interview, and I want to get into more detail, but I just can't recommend it highly enough. Also, I understand you have a couple of other books I want to give you a chance to mention.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes. I have a web page, and as I said, the Plucking book came out in 2009, and that was sort of a homage to my friend that passed away. But I had two children's Christmas books, and the first one's a real story. And they're both, and there's a third, fourth, and fifth one in my head. I got to get going on the third. But the first one's a true story about how a boy kept Christmas in school. I was, upset. I was irked. about winter solstice, no Merry Christmas in schools, getting rid of the Catholic Christian Christmas spirit. It's a holiday tree. No, it's not. It's a Christmas tree. All this New World Order stuff to de-Christianize, remove Catholicism, and that's what they want to do. You know, they want to break down the family. They want to remove any Christian, but especially Catholic way of life. And they know that's a big barrier, so they're attacking us. And so it's a true story about how a little boy, I wrote him a note saying I was Santa Claus and I was an elf. And he saved Christmas in school. They were going to have a holiday celebration, but he brought it to school about how a little boy brought a book to school and they had a Christmas celebration. They were going to have a winter solstice. And then I had a sequel. It's an anti-bully.
That little boy's a saint.
Yeah, it's a little boy that goes from about 6 years old. The second one, he's about 9 or 10, and he stops a bullying incident. They're all sort of a good theme to it.
I like it.
And
Okay.
stops a bullying incident. He goes up as an elf. I bring him to meet Santa Claus, and Santa meets him and has some nice words of wisdom for him. And there'll be a third book coming out, and I got a movie producer that's interested in both of these. From Connecticut, a local guy. We'll see what happens with it. He's busy with some projects and COVID slowed him down. But, and there's also a little bit of an adult theme between the elf, me, and maybe a teacher in the boys' school. So it's a fun story. It appeals, if you're reading it to your child or grandchild, you'll love the spirit and the theme of the story for the little boy. But in the back of your mind, there's sort of an adult love interest, perhaps romance, and what's going on that is fun. Also, it makes it fun for both the reader and the listener. So thank you for mentioning it.
Oh, fantastic! No, thank you for writing them. I'm looking forward actually to. I think I'll buy those for my godchildren, both of them. Just we need good moral stories and a child hero who stops bullying or brings Christmas back to. I think the bigger hero in that might even be the kid who brought Christmas back in school. So this is the more important
Little
thing.
Joe. Yeah.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, everybody check out James's website, and we are going to include a link in with this post to purchase Plucking the Eagle, Bringing Socialism to the United States. And I'm okay with the title because it was brought here, not by us. We aren't bringing it here. It was brought here by others. So I'm okay with that title. When you mentioned that in the beginning, it made perfect sense to me. So absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on. And I wanted to know, oh, you bet. I hope you come back again with your next book, or we could even elaborate on this. We've gone a lot longer than we wanted to, but we got some great information in. So I was wondering, would you lead us in a closing prayer, maybe a Hail Mary?
Sure, absolutely. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
All right. Thank you so much, James. I truly appreciate you coming to talk about your book. And absolutely, I can't wait to have you back again with the next one. And I want to thank everyone for watching. If you have any questions or you want to contact James, his email is on the screen, jamesconroy2000@yahoo.com. Feel free to contact him. We'll include a link if you want to purchase Plucking the Eagle. Check out his website. And I will see you all next time right here on No Soul Left Behind, where we are fighting for every single soul, including yours and mine. God bless you.
Bless you.